The girl sat on the small wooden bench in front of the piano in the corner of her room. The keys were worn in places, and the faint scent of polish still lingered from when her mother had cleaned it earlier that morning. She had been practicing for hours already, her fingers moving carefully over the keys, sometimes stumbling, sometimes finding the right note with a small smile of satisfaction. Music had always been her safe place. When the world felt loud and confusing, the piano was quiet and understanding. Her parents often watched her from the doorway, admiring her dedication. They did not say much, not because they were strict, but because they wanted her to discover her own love for music, to feel it inside her without pressure. Her father, who worked long hours at a nearby factory, often found himself thinking about her small hands dancing over the piano keys, imagining her one day performing in front of large audiences. Her mother, a nurse, noticed the way music seemed to lift her spirits. Even after a long day at school when she looked tired or frustrated, at school, she was quieter than most of her classmates. She liked to read during lunch and sometimes doodle little music notes in the margins of her notebooks. Some students did not understand her. They would tease her gently at first, calling her a bookworm or saying she was too serious. She tried to ignore it, but some days the words would stick to her mind and make her cheeks burn. The piano was her way of forgetting all that, her way of finding confidence inside herself. Every evening, after finishing her homework, she would return to the piano. Sometimes her older neighbor, who was a music teacher, would come by to give her lessons. He was kind but strict, and he had a way of noticing mistakes she did not even hear herself making. He would say things like, "The note is too short, try to hold it longer," or "Feel the emotion, do not just press the keys." At first she found these comments difficult. She wanted to play perfectly already, and hearing that she was not yet perfect sometimes made her hands shake. But slowly, she began to understand that the corrections were not meant to discourage her, but to make her stronger. Every note she practiced carefully became a little victory. One afternoon, as the sunlight fell across the piano, she stumbled through a difficult section of a new piece. Her fingers felt clumsy, and she pressed the wrong key one too many times. She sighed and pushed her hair behind her ear, frustrated with herself. Her neighbor, sitting nearby, did not interrupt. Instead, he waited until she finished before saying, "Remember, patience is the key. You are learning, not racing anyone else. Every mistake is a step forward." She nodded slowly, taking in the words, and started again, this time more carefully. When she finally played the section correctly, she smiled widely. That smile stayed with her long after she left the piano. The local music competition was announced at school one week. A flyer had gone around inviting students to showcase their talents. She hesitated to think about it at first. The idea of performing in front of people made her stomach twist in nervousness. What if she made a mistake? What if people laughed? But a small voice inside her whispered, "This is your chance to share the music you love." She felt a spark of excitement mixed with fear. After discussing with her parents, who encouraged her gently but firmly, she decided to sign up. The thought of performing, even with the butterflies in her stomach, began to feel thrilling. In the days leading up to the competition, she practiced more than ever. She set small goals each day. Today, she would master the first few measures. Tomorrow, she would work on the difficult middle section. Her fingers began to grow stronger, moving more confidently across the keys. She learned to breathe with the music, to feel each note as it came rather than worrying about the next one. Her parents noticed the change in her demeanor. She was still quiet at home, but there was a lightness in her step, a sense of purpose in her eyes. School life continued around her as usual. Some classmates noticed her dedication and teased her in whispers, calling her obsessive or saying she spent too much time with a piano that no one else seemed to care about. She tried not to let it bother her. Repeating the lessons she had learned from her neighbor, patience, focus, and believing in herself. The piano was her world. She had started to understand that it did not matter if others understood it yet. Her neighbor visited more frequently, helping her refine her technique and encouraging her to express emotion in her playing. He would sit quietly as she played, occasionally nodding or smiling at a beautiful passage. Sometimes he would suggest small changes in tempo or dynamics. helping her bring the music to life in a way that words could not describe. She began to feel that the piano was not just a collection of notes, but a way to communicate what she felt inside. The nervousness about performing began to be replaced by anticipation. One evening, as the competition drew closer, she played the entire piece without a single mistake. She paused at the end, her hands hovering over the keys, heart racing, and allowed herself a moment of pride. She realized that the journey had not been about winning or losing, but about growing, about discovering that she could accomplish something she once thought impossible. Her parents clapped softly from the doorway, their eyes shining with pride. She blushed but felt a deep sense of happiness that she had worked so hard to earn. The day before the competition, she felt a mix of excitement and anxiety. She rehearsed once more, paying careful attention to every note, every pause, every emotion. Her parents encouraged her to rest afterward, reminding her that she had done everything she could to prepare. That night, she lay in bed, listening to the faint hum of the city outside her window. Thinking about the piano and the audience she would soon face, she imagined herself playing confidently, hearing the music fill the hall and seeing people smile at her performance. Sleep came slowly, but when it did, she dreamed of music, of keys moving under her fingers, of applause echoing around her. When the morning of the competition arrived, she woke early, feeling the familiar flutter of nerves in her stomach. She dressed carefully, choosing clothes that were simple but made her feel confident. Her parents drove her to the venue, offering quiet encouragement along the way. The building was larger than she expected, filled with students, parents, and teachers. She felt a pang of nervousness as she saw the stage and the grand piano waiting at the center. The hall seemed alive with energy and expectation. Backstage, she watched other participants perform. Some were older, more experienced, and their confidence made her heart race. She tried to focus on her own preparation, taking deep breaths and running through the piece in her mind. Her hands were steady now, her fingers stretching and flexing as if waking up the piano inside her. The neighbor had given her one final piece of advice. Remember, the music is yours. Play it as you feel it, not as others expect. She repeated these words quietly to herself, feeling them settle like a warm blanket around her nerves. Finally, it was her turn. She walked onto the stage, the lights bright against her eyes. The audience was silent, waiting. She sat at the piano, feeling the weight of expectation, the whispers she had imagined from classmates who doubted her. She placed her fingers on the keys, closed her eyes for a brief moment, and then began to play. The first notes were careful, tentative, but soon she found the flow. Her fingers moved with confidence, each note clear and deliberate. The hall seemed to fade away, leaving only her and the music. For the first time, she understood what her neighbor had the girl sat backstage, her small hands resting lightly on the piano lid, trying to calm the fluttering in her stomach. The room behind the stage buzzed with energy. Students were moving around, tuning their instruments, and practicing last-minute notes. Some were chatting with their parents, some whispering among themselves, and a few were clearly confident, walking as if they already owned the stage. She could feel the weight of their experience pressing on her, but she forced herself to focus on the music she loved. As she waited, she heard murmurs from the audience. She could make out whispers, some questioning whether someone her age and size could really perform well. One older student leaned over to a friend and said, in a low voice, "I hope she doesn't embarrass herself." The words stung, and she felt her hands tremble slightly. But she remembered the advice her neighbor had given her: focus on the music, not the doubts of others. She took a deep breath and pressed her fingers together, trying to steady herself. The host of the competition called her name. Her heart jumped into her throat. She stood, feeling the eyes of everyone in the room on her. She walked toward the stage, each step feeling heavier than the last. When she reached the piano, she paused for a moment, taking in the large hall. The audience seemed enormous, and the bright lights made it difficult to see the faces clearly. She could feel a lump in her throat and a flicker of fear. But she tried to let it pass. She sat on the bench and positioned her fingers on the keys. For a moment, she thought about turning back, about running to the safety of her room where no one would doubt her. But then she thought of all the evenings she had spent practicing, the encouragement from her parents and neighbor, and the small victories she had achieved along the way. She straightened her back, inhaled deeply, and started to play. The first notes were cautious, delicate, almost hesitant. She could hear the faint whispers of some in the audience, a few people shifting uncomfortably. A girl in the front row leaned over to her friend and whispered, "She's so tiny. Can she even play this piece?" The comment made her cheeks heat up, but she pressed on. She reminded herself that her fingers knew the notes, even if her mind was worried. Slowly, she began to sink into the music, letting the sound flow through her as the piece progressed. She noticed some in the audience frowning, a few exchanging skeptical glances. It made her nervous, and she stumbled on a tricky passage. The wrong note rang out, clear and sharp in the silent hall. Her stomach sank. She could almost hear the quiet snickers, feel the judgment pressing down. But she remembered the countless times she had stumbled at home and learned to start again. She did not let the mistake stop her. She took a steadying breath, lifted her hands, and played the section again, this time with more confidence. Slowly, the music began to shift. The hesitant beginning became more expressive. Her fingers moved with greater ease, her touch lighter and more intentional. She focused on each note, letting the melody tell the story she had practiced so many times in her room. She imagined herself alone at home, where she had first fallen in love with the piano. And suddenly the stage did not feel so intimidating. The music was hers, and she was sharing it. Regardless of the whispers and doubts around her, some audience members began to pay closer attention. They leaned forward, curious about the small girl who had dared to face the stage. The skeptics still whispered, but there were also soft expressions of surprise as her playing grew more confident. The girl felt a spark of courage. She realized that if she could just focus on the music, the audience might see what she had seen in herself all along. Then came a particularly challenging section of the piece. It required speed and precision, and her hands moved quickly over the keys. She could feel the energy in her fingers, the rhythm building as the music swelled. The hall seemed to hold its breath, the audience leaning in closer, some unable to look away. She pressed on, pouring all her focus into each note, each pause, each expression. The whispers began to fade, replaced by quiet awe. A judge at the front row sat up straighter, eyes widening slightly. Another audience member whispered to their companion, "She's really good." The words reached her ears, and a small smile crossed her face, though she did not break her concentration. She did not need applause yet. She needed to finish the piece, to show herself that she could complete it with the skill and emotion she had been practicing for so long. The middle section of the piece required a soft, delicate touch. She closed her eyes for a brief moment, feeling the emotion in the music. Her fingers moved as if telling a story, each note full of feeling. It's full of the countless hours of practice, the quiet nights, the frustration, and the small victories. For a moment, the audience seemed to disappear, leaving only her and the piano. She felt a calm wash over her, a sense that she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Then, as the piece began to build toward its finale, she could sense the tension in the hall. Some audience members shifted in their seats, leaning forward, eager to see how she would finish. Others who had whispered doubts were now silent, their expressions showing surprise and curiosity. The small girl who had been underestimated was commanding attention. She pressed on, letting the music rise and fall with emotion, her heart pounding with excitement and nerves. She noticed a few students who had been mocking her at school, watching intently. Their faces were now serious, their earlier smirks replaced by concentration and perhaps a hint of respect. The realization made her heart lift slightly. She was not playing to prove them wrong, she reminded herself. She was playing because she loved the music. Yet, the shift in their expressions gave her a quiet sense of validation. She had been underestimated, and now, slowly, she was showing her true skill. As the piece neared its end, her confidence grew. Her fingers moved faster, more assured, yet still delicate, each note flowing seamlessly into the next. She felt the music in her entire body, from her toes to the tips of her fingers, each note resonating with her emotions. The audience could feel it too. She could see heads turning, eyes widening, and a few people holding their breath in anticipation of the final notes. The The hall, once filled with whispers and doubt, was now quiet, hanging on every sound. She reached the final measures. Her fingers danced lightly, then held the last note, letting it resonate fully before lifting her hands. There was a brief silence, the kind that makes a heart pound, before the audience erupted into applause. Some stood immediately, clapping and cheering. She looked up, startled, her cheeks flushing with pride and relief. The same people who had whispered doubts now clapped enthusiastically, smiles on their faces, some even leaning toward their neighbors to say, "That was amazing." The girl sat for a moment, letting the applause wash over her. Her heart was racing, her hands still trembling slightly from the performance. She felt a mix of emotions, pride, relief, and a deep joy that she had stayed focused on the music, despite the mockery and doubts. She realized that the whispers, the skepticism, and the nerves had all been part of the journey. They had made her stronger, more determined, and ultimately better prepared to share her music. As she rose from the bench, a few students approached her with smiles and compliments. Some of them admitted they had underestimated her, and others simply wanted to tell her how beautiful her playing had been. She nodded politely, smiling back, feeling a quiet sense of accomplishment. The mockery she had faced was now replaced with admiration, at least from some. And the music had spoken for itself. Backstage, her parents waited, their faces glowing with pride. Her mother hugged her tightly, whispering, "You did it." "You were amazing," her father nodded, his eyes shining. The girl hugged them back, feeling the warmth of their support. The stage, the audience, the nerves, and the mockery, all of it, had led to this moment. She had faced doubt and fear and emerged not only unscathed but triumphant. The journey was just beginning, but this first victory, born from dedication and love for music, was unforgettable. The girl sat at the piano, her heart still racing from the first notes she had played. She knew the eyes of the audience were on her, and though some had started to whisper doubts, others were now leaning forward, curious and eager. She took a slow, steady breath and reminded herself that the music belonged to her, not to anyone else in the hall. It was a thought that grounded her as she began the next section of the piece. This part was more challenging, with fast runs and notes that demanded precise timing. Her fingers flew over the keys, remembering the countless hours she had spent practicing each difficult passage. She had stumbled many times at home, frustrated, and sometimes even wanted to give up. But every mistake had taught her something, and now on this stage she could feel all those lessons coming together. Her fingers moved with a new confidence, hitting each note clearly. Letting the music rise and fall naturally, she noticed subtle changes in the audience. The skeptical whispers were quieter now, replaced by small gasps of surprise or murmurs of admiration. Some people were smiling, clearly enjoying the melody and the way she brought emotion to it. Her mind felt calmer, focused entirely on the music and the story it told. She felt as if she was speaking directly through her piano, communicating without words. Her neighbor's words echoed in her mind. "Feel the emotion. Do not just press the keys." She closed her eyes briefly and let herself feel the music, the tension, the beauty, and the excitement of the piece. Each note became a word, each phrase a sentence. She was no longer just playing. She was sharing herself. Her hands seemed to know what to do without needing to think too hard, and the music flowed smoothly, carrying the audience along with her. In the audience, some people were visibly moved. One teacher had leaned forward, eyes wide, clearly impressed by the emotion and control in her playing. A few students who had mocked her before were sitting rigidly, mouths slightly open in surprise. The hall had become quieter in a different way now, not with doubt, but with anticipation, as everyone waited to hear what would come next. She felt a thrill, a kind of energy she had never experienced before, and it made her fingers move faster, more confidently. The middle section of the piece required delicate touch and control. She softened her playing, letting the notes linger, each one telling a story of her dedication and patience. She thought of her parents watching her from the back, of the neighbor who had guided her, and of the many nights she had stayed up, practicing alone. She imagined sharing all those emotions through her music, and it gave her a quiet strength. Some members of the audience leaned closer, listening intently. Their expressions had changed from doubt to curiosity, and now to fascination. The energy in the room was different, heavier with focus and admiration. She felt the transformation happening, the way music could turn skepticism into appreciation, one note at a time. The thought filled her with confidence, not arrogance, but a gentle certainty that she was doing something important. She began to play a fast, flowing section, one that she had practiced tirelessly. Her fingers danced over the keys, precise and light, yet full of passion. The audience could see the skill and dedication in every movement. A few parents in the crowd whispered to each other, clearly impressed by the young girl's ability. Even some students who had doubted her began to sit straighter, unable to ignore the beauty and complexity of her performance. She felt a thrill, realizing that her hard work and perseverance were shining through as she reached the more intense passages. The room seemed to hold its breath. Each note carried weight, each chord built tension. She felt her own excitement growing alongside the music, a surge of energy that made her fingers move faster but without losing control. She could see the audience responding, leaning in, eyes wide, some biting their lips in awe. The whispers of doubt had disappeared entirely now, replaced by admiration and anticipation. A judge scribbled notes quickly, clearly impressed. Another judge nodded slightly, perhaps recognizing her skill and the emotion she was putting into the piece. The girl felt a quiet pride, not because she was seeking approval, but because she had overcome fear and doubt to reach this point. Every practice session, every mistake, every long hour of dedication had led her here, and now she could share it with the world. She began to slow slightly, bringing the piece into a softer, more expressive section. Her fingers lingered on each note, letting it resonate, letting the music breathe. She imagined telling a story without words, a story of patience, determination, and love for something greater than herself. Her focus was total, and she could feel the audience responding, not with words, but with emotion. She had captured their attention completely. The piece started to build again, moving toward the finale. Her hands moved with confidence and precision, every note clear, every passage full of emotion. She felt the excitement in the hall, the growing anticipation for the ending. Her mind was calm, even though her heart was racing. She knew she had reached a point where she could show her true potential. She was no longer the girl who doubted herself, who had listened to whispers and criticism. She was a musician, sharing her soul through the piano. Some students who had laughed or whispered before were now watching in silence, their faces showing surprise and admiration. Parents and teachers were smiling, leaning forward, clearly enjoying the music. The girl felt a warm sense of satisfaction, a deep joy in sharing something she loved and having it appreciated. She realized that her music had the power to change minds and hearts. One note at a time, she reached the climactic section of the piece, the notes fast and complex, yet flowing smoothly. Her fingers flew across the keys, her body moving slightly with the rhythm, completely immersed in the music. She felt a surge of energy, a thrill, a connection with every person in the hall. The audience was captivated, leaning forward, eyes wide, some whispering quietly to each other about the skill and emotion she was showing. She smiled faintly, knowing she had reached them, as she played the final measures. She could feel the tension in the room, the anticipation for the last note. She held it slightly, letting it resonate fully, savoring the sound and the moment. Then she lifted her hands, silence filling the hall for a brief heartbeat before applause began. It started softly, then grew louder, until the entire audience was clapping and cheering. Some people even stood up, unable to contain their admiration. The girl's cheeks flushed with pride and relief. She had done it. She had turned skepticism into awe with nothing but her music. Backstage, she felt a mix of emotions: excitement, pride, relief, and joy. She had faced doubt, mockery, and nerves, and had emerged victorious, not just in performance, but in self-belief. Her parents were waiting, their eyes shining with pride. They hugged her tightly, whispering words of admiration and love. She hugged them back, feeling the warmth and support that had always been her foundation. The girl realized that this moment was more than a performance. It was proof that perseverance, dedication, and belief in oneself could overcome doubt and fear. She had shared her music, touched the hearts of strangers, shown that talent and passion could shine through even when others doubted. The stage, the audience, the mockery all had been part of the journey that led her to this triumph. And she knew that this was only the beginning, that her love for music would continue to grow and inspire. One note at a time, the applause did not fade quickly. It rolled through the hall like a wave, loud and full, bouncing off the walls and ceiling. The girl remained seated for a moment, her hands resting in her lap, trying to understand what was happening. Just a short while ago, she had felt small and unsure. Now the sound around her felt overwhelming in a different way. People were clapping, some cheering, a few even standing. She slowly stood up and bowed, her face warm with emotion, as she looked out at the audience. She noticed how different their expressions were now. The doubtful looks were gone. In their place were smiles, wide eyes, and faces full of admiration. A few people nodded to her as if to say they understood now. The judges were clapping too, one of them smiling broadly, another whispering something to a colleague while still applauding. She felt her heart swell, not with pride alone, but with relief. She had been heard. When she walked off the stage, her legs felt light, almost shaky. Backstage felt quieter, yet her ears were still ringing with applause. Other students looked at her differently now. Some who had barely noticed her earlier smiled and said kind words. One student said softly that they never expected such a powerful performance. Another admitted they had doubted her and were surprised. She listened politely, nodding, still trying to settle her racing thoughts. Her parents rushed toward her as soon as she appeared. Her mother hugged her tightly, holding her as if afraid she might disappear. Her father placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, his eyes bright with pride. Neither of them said much at first. They did not need to. The moment spoke for itself. She felt safe and grounded between them. The noise of the hall fading into the background as the competition continued. She sat with her parents and watched the rest of the performances. Normally, she would have been nervous or distracted, but now she felt calm. She replayed her performance in her mind, remembering how she had pushed past the whispers and focused on the music. She realized something important then. The applause was wonderful, but the true victory had been staying true to herself when it mattered most. People in the audience continued to glance her way. Some smiled warmly. A few parents leaned over to whisper to her parents, praising her dedication and talent. Her parents listened humbly, thanking them, but they kept their attention on her, checking if she was comfortable, if she needed water, if she was feeling all right. She nodded, smiling softly, still glowing from the experience. When the time came for the results, the hall grew quiet again. The host spoke slowly, announcing different categories and participants. With each name called, the tension rose. She listened calmly, hands folded in her lap. Whatever the outcome, she felt she had already won something far more valuable than a prize. She had proven to herself that she could stand tall under pressure. When her category was announced, there was a brief pause before her name was called. The audience clapped again, and she felt a gentle nudge from her parents. She stood and walked toward the stage once more, her steps steady this time. The host smiled at her and handed her a certificate and a small trophy. The applause followed her again, warm and sincere. She bowed slightly, her heart full, as she returned to her seat. She noticed some of the same students who had mocked her earlier now clapping the loudest. One of them gave her a thumbs up. Another mouthed the words, "Well done." She did not feel angry or proud in a sharp way. She felt understanding. People often judged too quickly. She herself had learned not to let those judgments define her. After the event ended, people gathered in the lobby. Conversations filled the space, lively and excited. A few teachers approached her parents, speaking about her potential and suggesting future opportunities. The girl listened quietly, feeling a mix of excitement and nervousness. The idea that this moment could open new doors felt unreal, but also hopeful. Her neighbor, the one who had guided her so patiently, appeared from the crowd. He smiled warmly when he saw her. He did not praise her loudly or dramatically. He simply said that she had played with honesty and heart. Those words meant more to her than any applause. She thanked him, her voice soft but steady. As they left the building, the evening air felt cool and calm. The sky had begun to darken, and city lights flickered on around them. She took a deep breath, feeling tired but happy. The noise of the competition was behind her now, but the lesson it had taught her stayed close. She had faced doubt, stayed focused, and let her passion speak in the car ride home. Her parents talked quietly about stopping for a small treat, something to celebrate the day. She leaned her head against the window, watching the lights pass by. Her reflection stared back at her, and she barely recognized the confident look in her own eyes. She smiled gently, knowing she had changed in a way that could never be taken away. That night, she sat at the piano again. The room was quiet, familiar, comforting. She placed her fingers on the keys, not to impress anyone, not to prove anything, but simply because she loved the sound, the feeling, the way music helped her understand herself. She played softly, letting the notes drift through the room. She thought about the audience, the applause, the moment on stage. But more than that, she thought about the girl she had been before, the one who doubted, who felt small under judgment. She realized that girl was still part of her, but now she was stronger. She had learned that voices of doubt could be loud, but her own voice, carried through music, was stronger. As the final note faded, she lifted her hands and sat quietly. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opinions, new moments of doubt, but she knew now that she could face them. The piano had taught her patience, courage, and belief. And no matter where life took her, that lesson would stay with her, steady and true. The days after the competition felt different for the girl. Even though her daily routine stayed mostly the same, she still woke up early for school, still carried her books down the hallway, and still sat quietly in class. But something inside her had shifted. There was a calm strength in her now, a quiet confidence that did not need to announce itself. When she passed classmates who once ignored or mocked her, she noticed their changed expressions. Some smiled. Some nodded. A few even stopped to say kind words about her performance. She thanked them politely, but she did not let their reactions define her anymore. At school, teachers spoke to her with new interest. One asked about her practice routine. Another encouraged her to consider more advanced lessons. She listened carefully, feeling both excited and nervous. The attention was new. Part of her still felt like the quiet girl who preferred the back row and long afternoons with her piano. But she also understood that this was part of growth. Opportunities often came after moments of courage. At home, life felt warm and supportive. Her parents never pushed her to talk about the competition unless she wanted to. They were proud, but they stayed gentle, reminding her that her happiness mattered more than any award. One evening, they placed the small trophy on a shelf in the living room. It was not displayed in a bold or flashy way. It simply sat there, a quiet reminder of effort and belief. The girl glanced at it sometimes, smiling softly. But she spent more time at the piano than looking at the prize. Her neighbor continued to visit, just as before. He did not change the way he taught her. He still corrected small mistakes and reminded her to stay patient. One afternoon, after a lesson, he told her that growth did not end with applause. He said that true musicians kept learning even when no one was watching. She nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. The competition had been a moment, but music was a lifelong journey. She practiced with new purpose now. Not to impress others, but to improve herself. When she struggled with a difficult piece, she no longer felt defeated. Instead, she paused, took a breath, and tried again. She remembered how she had stumbled on stage and recovered, and that memory gave her strength. Mistakes no longer felt like proof of failure. They felt like part of learning. One afternoon, a younger student from school approached her shyly. The student said they had been afraid to join the music club because they were not very good yet. The girl listened carefully, then smiled and said that being good was not the most important thing. Loving the music was. She shared how she had been doubted too, and how she kept going anyway. The younger student's face brightened, and in that moment, the girl realized her story could help others. As weeks passed, invitations slowly came in. A local event asked if she would like to perform. A teacher mentioned a small scholarship program. Each opportunity felt exciting, but also a little overwhelming. With her parents' guidance, she chose carefully, making sure she did not lose the joy she felt when playing. She learned that saying no could be just as important as saying yes. Some evenings, she still felt tired or unsure. There were days when school felt heavy, when practice felt hard, when doubt tried to return. But now, when those thoughts appeared, she knew how to face them. She sat at the piano, played slowly, and let the music remind her who she was. The sound grounded her. It always had. She thought often about the moment on stage when the hall fell silent, when people truly listened. That silence had been powerful. It taught her that being heard did not always require loud words or bold actions. Sometimes it required patience, honesty, and the courage to keep going even when others doubted you. Her parents noticed how she carried herself now. She stood a little straighter. She spoke with a little more confidence. Not in a proud or loud way, but in a steady one. They knew that the competition had given her more than recognition. It had given her belief in herself. One quiet night, she sat alone in her room, the window open to let in the cool air. The city outside was calm. She played a simple melody, one she had learned long ago. It was not difficult or impressive, but it felt honest. As the notes filled the room, she felt grateful. Grateful for the piano, for her parents, for the teacher who guided her, and even for the people who once doubted her. Without them, she might never have discovered how strong she could be. She understood now that life would continue to test her. There would be new challenges, new voices, and new moments of uncertainty. But she also knew that she carried something steady within her. Music had taught her patience, courage, and resilience. Those lessons would stay with her long after the applause faded. When she finished playing, she rested her hands on her lap and sat quietly for a moment. She was no longer the girl who feared being judged. She was someone who had faced the crowd, shared her heart, and remained true to herself. Whatever came next, she was ready to meet it. One note at a time. Months had passed since the competition, and the girl had grown in ways she had not imagined. The trophy on the shelf remained a quiet reminder of that day, but it was not what she thought about most. She spent long hours at the piano, exploring new pieces, experimenting with melodies, and learning to express herself more deeply through music. Each practice session felt like a conversation between her heart and the instrument. Sometimes she played softly, almost whispering the notes. Other times, she let her fingers move quickly, full of energy and life. School life had settled into a new rhythm. Her classmates treated her with respect, though she did not notice it much because she had learned not to focus on the opinions of others. Some students would quietly compliment her when they heard her play during breaks, while others still looked surprised that someone so young could play with such skill. She smiled politely, but she remained humble, knowing that talent was only part of the journey. Hard work, patience, and love for music mattered even more. Her parents were still her biggest supporters, but they gave her space to explore and grow independently. They encouraged her to try new challenges and always reminded her to play because she loved it, not for recognition. She felt safe in their support, which allowed her to take risks in her music. One weekend, she decided to learn a particularly difficult classical piece. The first time she attempted it, her fingers stumbled over the complex notes and she grew frustrated. But she remembered all the times she had pushed through difficulties before and tried again. Slowly, the music started to take shape under her fingers, each practice session bringing improvement and confidence. Her neighbor continued to mentor her. He introduced her to new styles of music and encouraged her to compose her own pieces. One evening, he told her that understanding music went beyond playing notes. It was about telling a story and conveying emotion. The girl listened carefully, her eyes shining with curiosity. She started to experiment with small compositions, arranging simple melodies into pieces that expressed her feelings. It was challenging, but she loved it. Music had become more than an instrument. It was a language she was learning to speak fluently. Word of her talent began to spread outside school. A local community center invited her to perform at a small event. She hesitated at first, nervous about playing in front of strangers again, but her parents encouraged her. They reminded her that the stage was just a place to share music, not a place to seek approval. She took a deep breath, practiced diligently, and prepared herself. The day of the event, she felt the familiar flutter of nerves, but also excitement. As she played, she noticed people listening intently, some closing their eyes, letting the music reach them. She felt the same joy she had during the competition, realizing that the act of sharing music itself was the reward. After the performance, a few audience members approached her, expressing their admiration and curiosity about her training. She answered politely, sharing her journey and emphasizing the importance of practice and persistence. One elderly woman said softly that she had never seen someone so young play with such maturity. The girl felt warmth spread through her chest, not because of praise alone, but because she had touched someone's heart with her music. She realized that music had the power to connect people, to tell stories, and to inspire feelings that words sometimes could not.